one of those wonderful things that you just don't think about.
Yeah.
And so consequently, he would fish any chance he got. And I just thought he'd been doing a little too much fishing. So one day I got very upset, and I finally stopped, and I banged my wooden spoon on the counter of the dining hall. I said, what do I have to do to get some attention from my fisherman husband? Wiggle my tail like a lady bass? And he just turned bright red. And I got to go to the house for a little bit, and that was it. He was not confrontational. Well, that night he came in after supper, and he said to Donald and I want you guys to get cleaned up. We're going to go to Tulsa. Since when? Well, that Star Wars movie is on, and I'm taking you two to see Star Wars. Now, he could have cared about Star Wars, like, you know, like counting sand or something. But that was all it took. I just had to, a little bit. And that, I told some of the house mothers, you know, don't hesitate. This man who brought you here loves you. Just straight out, I want attention. I don't see them needing it as much now because they get some time off now.
Yeah.
Regulated time off, which is such a blessing.
It is. And other foster care places do not do that
Right.
at all. And it is so needed. Like,
absolutely.
I think it would save a lot of like bad cases that happen from happening if they just got a little bit of mental time off.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, when we first came, nobody had any time off in a year and a half. We gave the Ramses. They were children practically, children taking care of children, and they had a day and a half. And they left Terry with us. That's their oldest daughter. Now has 5 children of her own, I think, and she's a grandmother. But we bathed our dog. We brought a miniature schnauzer with us, and we gave him a bath in the tubs that you did the laundry in those days. Well, when they came through the back door, Terry went ballistic. They bathed the dog in the wash tubs. They bathed the dog. She was just so excited about that. But we had quite a collection of varmints.
And what would you tell new children coming in if you give them some advice?
Well, the first thing I do is hug them. And I always say it with all of the enthusiasm I can muster within my heart. I am so glad God sent you to us, because we're going to love the socks off of you. Really, that's my initial reaction to that child. I always ask where they're from, which is absolutely none of my business, but I just want to know. And then the second, how old are you? And of course you'll laugh. The third one is you never come to Grandma's house after dark if you don't want to get shot. I have a reputation that try to get in my house after dark, I will shoot you. If you're male, you're going to walk with the limp and sing soprano. If you're a female, you may never ride a horse, but I am going to shoot you. And that's when I lived on that highway.
Yeah.
I had some very interesting people stop on that highway. But we've got such wonderful house parents right now. They love the Lord. They love their kids. There's one thing now that I can't say that because Ron's here now, but we went a long time when you weren't allowed to have any pets.
I remember a little bit of that. Or I thought it was we could just only have one.
Well, not in the big houses. They're not allowed to have any now.
Really?
Well, we're afraid somebody might have an allergy. Really?
I thought we just had to keep them outside.
Well, I think they can keep them outside. I know the Maroons, they have Sky, and she's a yellow lab, and she is outside. But they come to see Ben all the time.
Because I got in trouble quite a bit because our cat I would open the window and let him inside.
Sure. Why not? I don't see any punishment for that. I didn't see a cat in here. We had a pet raccoon in our house, number 4 house. And his name was Francisca. And she slept in the top of the closet back in the girls' side. And I had one of the girls come out one morning and she said, Mom, Francisca has got to stop chewing up the hems on my dresses. I don't know. It was like she got a hold of them. She'd want to pull them all out. And Yeah. Now that a boy from Moody's caught that coon and brought it to Nancy, because my Nancy hated every minute she was here. The day we arrived, my 9-year-old son thought he had died and arrived in heaven. All this land, exploring.
Yeah.
My 14-year-old daughter thought we had brought her to prison, and in a week she knew we had. And it was so hilarious. Fast forward. I think Leanne was about 35, and she looked at us one night. We were out to dinner in Ohio, and she says, "Do you guys realize that if we hadn't gone to Cookson Hills, I'd be dead by now?" You and Dad had no idea. I had already been into drugs for 3 years. We thought we were smart parents. But you see, we took her away from all that down here. But here she had a good time. She was in a choir. She was in Bible Bowl. Our family traveled all the time. She was my piano player. She played piano and she played organ. It was her salvation. And I think sometimes that's why God sends us here. Yes, he needs his laborers, but there's laborers with a troubled child. Let's sing that one.
Yeah. I've definitely talked with my dad about, like, because I was born here, you know, and I was just, like, thinking about, like, what a difference it made. And he doesn't think it made a difference, but I told him I think it made me, Deanna, and Corey all probably 10 times smarter than anybody else around that we can think of, just because, I don't know, it opened our eyes almost.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? To what the world has to
Right.
offer that's good and bad.
Right, and you know that difference.
Yeah.
So many times when it's presented to our children in the world, they don't have any balancing. How do I tell which is good or which is bad? If you've been brought up in a home, the Lord God is worship. And he's a member that sits down at the table with you. I don't put mine in a box on Sunday morning. Who called me today? Somebody called me. A friend was in town and they got Ben some medicine. Ben has an enlarged heart. He's 10 years old and he hasn't been acting right, and the vet says he has an enlarged heart. So we've got him on medicine. And I had to laugh because she called. Now, why would she call me? We've only known each other 5 years. She called, "Grandma, can I get you anything?" I said, no, wait. Can you go to the vet and get this and this and this? Oh, yes. I hung the phone up and I looked at Ben and I start applauding. And I'll say, "Ben, do you know Jesus did that? Jesus did that. Well, don't we love him?" And Ben's going, but he's used to Mom doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
But we walk every morning, we sing and we praise. How can you do that on a busy street in the city? I know women who do it, but I'm surrounded with a concert of birds. They're surrounded by a concert of trucks, cars, bicycles, and so forth. I live half a step below heaven. So I don't have really far to go when my time comes, which I have talked to him about that quite a bit. I am so ready, but he isn't. So I don't know what he's got every day. You said getting up in the morning at 7. I get up in the morning now. I feed my dog. I turn off the outside light. I have to bring every bird feeder you see in my yard into the house because the raccoons drink all of the sugar water and eat all of the bird seed.
Oh, yeah. They will.
And so I mean, it's a ritual. So I take everything back out and hang it up. And I have got a blue jay that is knocking on the window now if I'm not out there early enough. So it's a whole new different way of life. And I try to keep busy the better part of the day. I do take a nap in the afternoon now. I don't know why babies cry about that. I think it's wonderful. That it's a different life, and yet it's a good life.
Hi everybody, this is Grandma Wilkinson, and do you want me to introduce you by something else, or is that all right?
That's fine.
Like, I only know you by Grandma Wilkinson, and so.
And you notice that is what I was called by the folks that you came in. It's very strange to hear someone say, "Is Mary Ellen Wilkinson live here?" And I'm going, "What? All right, where are you from?"
Could you describe to people what Cookson Hills is in your own words?
Oh, wow. What is Cookson Hills? A collection of people, I feel, called by God specifically to deal with children who need somebody to love them that extra mile. And not just house parents, our cooks, our mechanics, our lawn mowers, our school teachers, everyone who lives and works in this place, I feel, have been called by God to serve him in this place at this time. Now, Mr. Hallam, who founded this place, I have to laugh. He used to say, "Oh, Satan would slip in one every now and then." And I have seen that happen. Yeah. But Satan never wins. So yeah, who was it? A lady said to me at Senior Citizens today, "I wish I lived where you did." Why? I mean, she doesn't even like herself, let alone kids. And I said, "Why?" And she said, "You live a half a step below heaven, don't you?" I think she's right. So I only have a half a step up to go home. But I do love it. I really do.
What brought you here in the first place?
My husband.
Your husband did?
I'd love to tell you the Lord, but it was my husband. I was just following him. No. When I was 14, I wanted to be a missionary more than anything in the world. But when I said missionary, I'm thinking Africa, China, the dark places of the world. Fast forward 26 years? Yeah. Age 40. Don came to me one evening and said, "I have no idea your reaction to what I'm telling you, but God wants me. He doesn't want me to preach. He wants to use my hands. And I have to find a place in the kingdom to use my hands." And I thought, well, that's great, because Grandpa could do anything. The furniture you're looking at, the wooden furniture in this house, yeah, he's built all of it. And so, and that is from a tree that was 250 years old, a board. He could take nothing and make something beautiful. And that's what he wanted to share with the kingdom. And I looked at him and I said, "What about me?" And he stopped and he looked, and Grandpa was very quiet, very shy. He said, "You can go with me if you want to." And that was when I realized that prayer was answered. We didn't know where we were going. So we sent out references to every Bible college. And our daughter called and said, "Why don't you send one to Cookson Hills?" She had come here from Johnson Bible College on Week of Evangelism. And that's how we found out about Cookson Hills. Of all those letters we sent out, we got back one from Cookson Hills. That was the 1st of January. The middle of January, we drove from Akron, Ohio down here. And they told us they would take us. And on March 31st, we got here. And we could see his hand falling. Our house was on the market 3 hours and 45 minutes.
Wow. Yeah.
That sort of tells you he's in a hurry to get you to where you need to be. And it was, I went to my pastor and I said, Clyde Truitt at Northwest Avenue Church of Christ in Talmadge, Ohio. I said, "Clyde, we're going to do this." And he said, "Let me warn you now. Do not run before the Lord." 3 days later, I called and I said, "Clyde, we can't keep up with the Lord," because he was just putting this in place and this in place and this in place. And my mother was widowed at the time, and I remember she said, "What about me?" And I just remembered all the lessons that she had taught. I said, "Mama, you always taught us that the church took care of the widows and the orphans. Seems to me that God's sending me to take care of the orphans, and the church is going to take care of you." And that's exactly what happened. His work is incredible. And my heartbreak in today's world, within the Christian world now, is we don't testify to his greatness and his mercy and his joy. We kind of shove it under the table and we just talk. Well, there's nothing wrong with talking about grace and righteousness and all that. But that's when we bring them in. When we get them in, let's share his goodness, his greatness, and his mercy. That's what's fun.
And what does a typical day look like for you? Because I know it's probably changed quite a bit since when you first got here, but could you explain, like, maybe at the beginning and what it is now?
Okay, at the beginning, we became parents of 10 children in 2 days.
Okay, wow, yeah.
It was interesting. 2 of those children came out of psychiatric wards. They didn't tell us that, and I'm so glad. The second day, I got 2 little boys. One was 2 years old, still in a diaper, still on a bottle, no speech, just guttural sounds. And his brother, who was 3 and a half, who had the vocabulary of a drunken sailor. I can remember the preacher brought him to the door. And I looked at him, I said, Jim Woolsey, my name is not Sarah. I'm not to have these babies at age 100. And he said, God wants you to have them. And I want to testify to you, if I hadn't had those 2 little boys, I would have left this place. But I just knew in my pride that nobody could straighten those little boys out like I could. And they became Buddy and Bobby, and we went everywhere together. I call it housebreaking because I'm a doggy person, but I had to potty train Buddy. Buddy's name was Cecil Earl, so no, he's going to be my buddy. And Bobby and I don't know, it was like allowing to be a part of the very special in the kingdom of God. Now maybe that was my excitement of newness, but we got a lot of kids who needed help. 5.5 years after being a house parent with 60 kids, we started cooking. Eddie challenged Don to cook. And once again, I had a question, what am I going to do? Because I was not a good cook. I'm not a good cook to this day, especially when you're married to a guy who is wonderful. And Ralph Gorman looked at me and said, you're going to learn to bake bread. Within 1 week, I was baking 36 loaves of bread, 5 days a week. And it's just like I'd done it all my life. And we did that for 17.5 years. We have the cooking record for Cookson Hills.
I did not know that at all.
I thought of that the other day. 17.5 years we cooked in that 920 dining hall.
Wow, yeah.
That was cool. And it was a totally different ministry. That's when I started teaching piano. I had always ran 12 to 16 piano students. We had different children then, Natalie. We had children who really needed a safe place. We needed kids whose parents were just worn out and didn't know which way to go. And unless you've been a parent and not experienced that, praise God, but most of us have. And it made us very sympathetic toward parents. I've had good kids, I've had rotten kids, I've had kids that I have cried over, and kids I've never been so happy to see parents come and get in all my life. It was a hard road to hoe. When we moved to the dining hall, a good example of your relationship. In those days, the kids called us Mom and Dad. And they were permitted to call us Mr. and Mrs. if they so choose. But they would not call us by our first name, and we would not answer to hey you. That's all there was to it. Well, we got my 2 little boys, and all they knew to call me was Mom. And I can remember so many days, Buddy would say, Mom, Mom, Mom. And I said, I just changed my name, it's Dad. So go call Mom. So he'd go to Don and go, Mom, Mom, Mom. Don would look at him and say, do I look like your mom? So he'd run. This was, you're wore out. Now we're going to leave and go to the dining hall. And of course, we had that little trailer in the middle of the 920. And Buddy came in and he said, what do I call you now? And everything in me just rose up. I had no idea. Dad came up beside me. He said, "Hey, buddy, why don't you call us Grandma and Grandpa now? Is that okay with you?" "Sure it is. You do that." So we went from Mom and Dad to Grandma and Grandpa. And did that for 17 and a half years. Then we were retired.
So, when you like started with the Grandma and Grandpa thing, were you guys the first people who went like that direction with it? Because I know that other people here, like Grandpa Moody,
Yeah,
Grandma and Grandpa Crawford, are also like that. But how did that start all together?
there were grandparents here when we got here.
They were
Yes, there were older people here who were related to some of the staff, but they had their own individual mobiles down in the, what is the park now. And yes, there were grandparents here at that time. Retired ministry, things like that.
And what do you think the toughest part of being at Cookson was for you?
Saying goodbye to the kids when you knew they weren't ready. It broke your heart. And that includes graduation. You know they are not ready. You know they're going to fall in a pit. And yet you also know who's going to catch them. And it's a constant job to remind yourself that you are not. But that kid needs, in the vernacular, we have a wonderful man in our church who is a recovering alcoholic. His maker, he calls him. His savor maker. And our kids, you hate to know that they're going to have to go out and get that. You want them all safe and secure. Well, at 18, I wasn't very safe and secure. Yeah. I wanted to try life and everything that goes with it. And maybe that's because you don't want them to. There's a lot of heartache and things like that in it.
And on the other end of that, what do you think would be the best part about it?
Oh, just being a part of their lives. Buddy and Bobby. You want me to tell you a story about Buddy? Was hilarious. It was last day of school. School bus. At that time, we bused our kids to Kansas. Buddy comes walking, head down, dragging his toes. And I said to Bobby, his brother, "What's wrong with Buddy?" He was going to kindergarten at Kansas. Buddy looked up, he said, "I flunked." "What?" "I flunked." I said, "What do you mean you flunked?" "You've got to go back and do kindergarten again." Bobby, his interpreter, said, "Means he failed, he flunked. You know flunk, but Mom, you know what flunk means, don't you, Mom?" And I said, "Yes, I do. But wait a minute now. You flunked? You mean your kindergarten teacher wants you to come back and be with her again next year?" "Yeah." "Wow. She must really love you, Buddy." "What?" "Well, just stop and think how much help you can be. You know where the gnats go. You know where the colors are. You know how to get to the water fountain and back. Oh, she must love you. Miss Ingalls must really love you to want to keep you to help her next year." And out of that flunked came a stiffening of the backbone. He said, "Yeah, I'm going back again. I'm going to help Miss Ingalls." It's how it's presented. It's how he was the proudest kid you ever saw when he started back to school. And Mrs. Ingalls called me and she said, "What did you say to Cecil?" And I told her, and she said, "I'm sending all of my children that don't make it down there." It was just one of those wonderful things. Yeah. There's a story of Loree. And Loree, her dad was the captain of detectives of the Enid Police Department. She was a chronic runaway. And she was so precious. I just loved that girl. I didn't trust her as far as I could pick her up and throw her, but I loved her. And she was so bad that those were the days of the maxi skirt, that when my girls would line up to go to school, they'd have to pull up their skirts, so I made sure they didn't have their blue jeans on underneath because they'd run away. And the first day Larry came, Mr. and Mrs. Duke, he was a policeman too, and her dad and mom brought her. And we got her all settled in. And they said it was time to go, and they got up and everyone kissed her goodbye. Her dad got outside the door, and you could hear him sobbing, not just crying. I'm talking deep gut all the way, sobbing. What was wrong with me? Why couldn't I do it? And the policeman that was with him said, "You're not the first." And they comforted him as they took him. And Marie stood there and she said, "I didn't think they'd leave me." And I said, "Well, they have for a while." She became my best buddy. She was so much help with the younger children, and she could play a guitar like nobody you ever heard. I had a guitar player, a piano player, a bass player, and singers. We only went to the Kansas Christian Church, I think, 6 Sundays out of 1 year. The school sent us everywhere because we were the singing Wilkinsons or something, I don't know. But we just had great kids. Great kids. Had one boy die in prison. And that's right. Marty died in prison up in Wyoming. And all of a sudden, the school was getting donations in memory of Marty. And the office called and said, "What happened to Marty?" Well, I didn't know, so I went down and I knew he was in prison. He jumped ship in the Navy and wandered from the East Coast up to Wyoming. And so I called the prison and asked to speak to the guard in the isolation unit. And I said, "My name is Mary Ellen Wilkinson, and I'm calling about Marty." And he said, "You're Mom Wilkinson at Cookson Hills." I said, "Yes, I am. Marty talked about you and Pop all the time." "Oh, would you tell me what happened?" He said, "Well, you know Marty and his mouth." "Yeah, I sure do." He said, he and another fellow decided to leave the prison, go over the wall. And the other fellow made it. Marty fell and broke his leg. So we had him in the dispenser one night, and then we put him in an isolation unit. He said, "Unfortunately, our prison is so crowded. We have 2 to 3 men in every isolation room, which is supposed to have 1. Yeah. And those men killed him that night. They suffocated him. And he said, "I only knew him for 2.5 weeks, but all he talked about was Cookson Hills and Mom and Dad." You have no idea what you're doing with these kids. And then there's the ones that come back and see you and you But Del Smith lives in San Francisco, and he's been several. In fact, when Grandpa died 20 years ago on the 28th day of this month. Wow, doesn't seem that long. A week after Dad died, Del brought his wife here, and they walked all over this place because Dad and him used to walk all over this place. It's good. You got good things to remember.
And that is just, I like the uniqueness of like your view on it, how even though he may have died in prison, like you took away that he was talking about like y'all and everything that had happened here.
Because this was a good place.
It is, yeah. It was that safe haven.
Yep. The first thing he said to me, "I sing very well, and I'd like to sing in the Christmas program." Okay. It was July. They were neat kids, though. They were.
And one thing I really remember, probably the most about you, more than anything, was stories that we had.
Story time at the library.
Yes. How did that come about?
I come from a family of storytellers. My people are from East Tennessee, the mountains, hillbillies, if you will. I was a daddy's girl, outrageously so. And when age 12 to 18, every November 16th, which was my birthday, if I had straight A's on my report card, my daddy and I would fly from Akron, Ohio to Tri-City Airport in Bristol, Tennessee, and go across the mountain, and we would hunt quail for a week. And then we would fly to Georgia and hunt pheasant for the second week. And that was my birthday present. Well, after you've been in the field hunting quail all day, and November's cold, we'd sit around a fire at my Grandma Davis's house, and the men would tell stories about fox hunting or running somebody out of the county, breaking up a still, and just country stories.
Yeah.
And one night, my Uncle Mac looked at Daddy and said, "Jim, you remember when Lizzie got baptized?" Now, Lizzie was my mother's sister. And Daddy looked at Uncle Mac and said, "Mac, don't say a word." He said, "Why?" He said, "She listens and she'll remember every single thing. She'll get into trouble over it." Well, that just made Uncle Mac determine he's going to tell me that story. That's my signature tale, is Aunt Lizzie's baptizing. They couldn't get her under. She was being baptized in the Clinch River, and they could not get her under the water because she had made a fancy dress out of lawn. You don't even find lawn now. It's almost as good as silk. And when the preacher started to take her under, the air got under her dress. I don't know who that is, so I'm not going to answer it. I love the phones that tell you who people are.
I do too.
So anyhow, the preacher called him out, and they had him under the water. That's my answer.
Okay.
And it was so funny because he went to call the deaconesses in to come. This was 1916, and no man ever touched a woman below her neck. So he couldn't just reach down and knock the air out. He called the deaconesses to come. And when he did that, she slipped out of his embrace and went sailing down the Clinch River in an air device singing, "Lord, I'm coming home." Now, how could you not remember a story like that?
Yeah.
The one that I used to tell here at Christmas was the night my same grandmother Davis, took us to the barn, put us to bed at 6 o'clock in the evening. It was Christmas. My parents wanted us to see what Christmas was like in the country. Grandma Davis was 4'8" tall. And she got all of us, there were 5 of us, my 3 cousins that lived with her, and Jimmy and my kid brother and I. And I do this with the children here at Cookson now. And my kid brother, Jimmy. I only had one brother. And Grandma came, and she woke us up about 11 o'clock at night, or midnight. "Come on, don't whisper." And she had a lantern. We had to bundle up, and we walked out and around where Mama used to milk the cows, and up to the near barn. They had 2 barns, a near barn and a far barn. Far barn is where they hung the tobacco to cure out. The near barn is where the livestock stayed at night. And she made us promise not to say a word. She held the lantern. We got to the near barn. She opened the door. We slid in, and we looked around, and every animal in the barn was on its knees with its head down. And she looked at us and said, "Even the creatures know that they must bow before the King of Kings on the night he was born." I don't think that didn't make an impression on us. Even in the rafters, the chickens and the doves were hunkered. And she wanted us to see that even the critters of the earth bow down to the King of Kings on his birthday. You don't forget things like that. And everybody has a story. You girls have a story. We went to this house, this old lady, and she's got the dog. She's got a nick. You've got a story, haven't you? The whole world is full of stories. We just don't take time to figure them out.
That was always my favorite thing. I remember you like sit crisscross applesauce on the cushions God gave you, and that was exactly every time.
And I still say that. Ask Miss Hodges, our first grade teacher, and she asked me to tell stories to her kids, and I would say, okay, let's crisscross applesauce on the cushions that God gave us. And you always get some little smart kid that just gets the biggest kick out of it. Now tell me some of the kids that were here when you were that age.
My sister Deanna, obviously, and then the Andersons, like Zachary, Riley.
Did you know Michael just graduated?
Michael? Oh, I just remember him being small. I can't.
I can remember him crawling around at a meeting and his dad crawling behind him trying to catch him. Yes. Okay, I've got you in a section now. You realize I've been here 48 years.
That is wild.
Yes, it is. Life began at 40. As Dad used to say, us and Moses, he sure had to deal with us. And then, of course, Dad would have been here, 28 years when he went home.
And another thing that I remember was the Hairy Man stories. And one kid would get so scared that he could not be in the library. They had to let him leave.
That was Michael.
That was Michael.
Yes, he couldn't stay. Yes, I found that, the Hairy Man story the other day in some of my storytelling material, and I thought, well, that and the Arkansas, what was that animal that I told the story about?
I don't know about that one, but I just remember the Hairy Man, and then like a dog saved you and like somehow pulled you out of the pond.
Oh yeah, that was our Newfoundland dog that pulled me out of the pond, and to this day, they had to talk to me 4 hours to baptize me. They wouldn't throw that water over my head. Yeah, I think maybe that was the traumatic thing, because I can't swim to this day.
That's probably what it was.
Yeah, that story, and what was the one you said? I'll think of it later. We've had fun. My kid brother came one time when I was telling stories and sat in the back of the media room up at the library, and it was so funny because I have always made him a villain.
Yeah.
And he was sitting back there, and I would say, and you know my brother, he's such a sissy. He's afraid of everything. He and his wife sat back there. He said, "Sis, why do you do that?" And I said, "Because it makes me feel good." We were two totally different people. I was known as Jim's girl. My brother was known as Maud's boy. We each had a parent, and we knew that very early on, who belonged to which parent. And yet our parents loved us dearly, which was the hardest job I had at Cookson Hills. How do you teach a kid who his father has abused him, or worse, or was never in the picture to start with? Maybe it was, and now he's gone, and the come and go fathers. How do you teach children about an Abba God, a daddy God, when they have no concept of a daddy on earth? And I did. I just assumed, I guess, that everybody had a great dad. I found out that's not true. So it was the hardest task of all, teaching the love of a godly father. And none of the kids ever got to meet my dad because he went home before we came. I know, Zomo the rabbit.
Zomo the rabbit.
I have it. I have the book from Zomo. I finally found it. It's a story of West Africa by Gerald MacDonald. And I've told that story for years. And the first person who told it was this huge African-American woman who was a registrar at Amherst College in Massachusetts, and she had on the African clothing. She was fantastic. And it was in Oklahoma City at Winter Tales. And she called me, and I went up afterwards, and I said, her name was Potawatomi, and I said, may I tell that story? And she said, you're not the right color. I said, but I can pretend I'm the right color. And she started laughing. She said, if you can pretend you're the right color, you tell that story. She was a tremendous storyteller. She's told us an African Cinderella. Wow, it was great.
That's awesome.
We also had a man tell us the story of Cinderella from her godfather's side of view. You know, it was always her godmother who did all it.
Yeah.
Well, he was the godfather. He was Irish as Paddy's pig. It was great. So what else?
Okay, I have two more. What would you tell new house parents that are coming in to Cookson?
First of all, don't stop loving each other. Don't get so tied up in the kids' lives you forget you have a mate and children of your own. That would be the first. The second is do not ever let the kids come before your God. That's an easy thing to do. Those, I think, are the two hardest. Is remembering that. I can remember I used to get so mad at Don. He was so busy teaching kids how to change tires and doing stuff under the engine, stuff like that. And one day, and he loved to fish. Do you remember that about Grandpa?
I don't think I would have been 2 when he died.
Oh, well, no,
yeah,
you don't. He used to go fishing. We'd catch crappie and we'd clean them. Neither of us liked fish. We'd have a hot dog. But we would have a fish fry for the whole 920. And of course, word got out on campus, so we'd have 20 to 30 extra people at the dining hall. Didn't bother me because I didn't eat fish. And so he would fix all that fish, and I would do the coleslaw and the fried potatoes, and it was fun. The family gathered. And he would find any excuse in the world to go fish. I remember one time he came in and said, can you fix supper? I got it ready. All you have to do is put it on the table. It's fine. He said, I have got to get Jason Duke out of here. Walter's going to kill him. Jason was in junior high. When Papa went home, Jason sent a letter to be read by his son at Don's celebration. And he talked about going fishing with Grandpa and how it was so much fun and how much it meant to both his spiritual life and his family life.